gente, hello and welcome to Kica's Corner. My name is Kica Matos and I am your host. On this show, we look at our community, our city, and the world through a social justice lens. Today, we're going to talk about the theater, but we're going to talk about the theater as seen through the eyes of a visionary new leader in our community. His name is Jacob Padron, and he is the new artistic director of the Long War Theater. Let me say a little bit about Jacob. Jacob hails from Gilroy, California. He went to undergraduate school at Loyola Marymount University, then came to Yale to get his MFA at the Yale School of Drama. He is the founder and artistic director of the Soul Project. He's also worked for the Public Theater as a senior line producer. He was a producer at the Steppenwolf Theater Company, and he's also worked with the Yale Repertory Theater, Baltimore Center Stage, Teatro Vista, and About Face Theater. And now we're blessed to have him in New Haven. Jacob's vision, as you will soon hear, is not just about theater. It is about community, it's about justice, and it's about using arts to create inclusive spaces where all voices are heard. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So how does it feel to be back?
Oh my goodness. It actually feels really energizing to be back. I mean, I think when you're a student at Yale, there's not time for much else other than really like studying, going to class. And I didn't to be honest, I didn't really have a relationship with the community. So to return and to rediscover the city in beautiful new ways, and getting to know all who call New Haven their home, it's been really energizing and really fortifying. So I feel really blessed to be back and to return to this community and to give back to this community that gave me so much. Because when I actually think about the most formative time in my life, honestly, it's that time in graduate school from 2005 to 2008. And so again, to return to this community who actually gave me so much, even though I was so mired in my books and in my studying, it's pretty cool to be back.
So why did you decide to come to New Haven? Why New Haven and why the Long War?
I mean, I think, Long War Theater, I think, is one of our most important theater companies. I think it's on the precipice of exciting change and transformation. I do think that it has a lot to give. And I think that, the city of New Haven also is incredibly exciting. This city, as you know, Kica, is a city steeped in activism, in justice, and that's so key to who I am and in terms of my core values. So it just felt like there was alignment, and to be able to do that inside a theater organization that I really believe in, it just felt like the right time and the right place.
And where are you living? What neighborhood?
I live in East Rock. I wanted to live, relatively close to the theater, but also in a community that, I felt like could support me in my process. And I love East Rock. That was actually one of the areas that I did spend some time in when I was a graduate student.
So you, one of your legacies already is that you founded the Soul Project.
Yes.
And the reason that you stayed as creating this entity was to give voice to Latinx playwrights.
Yes.
And artists of color.
Yes.
In what ways has theater historically been neglectful of the voices of people of color?
I mean, there is a long, complicated, I think, history of the way in which the American theater has not fulfilled its promise. I believe the promise of the American theater is to be a space to hold all our stories, but we are the architects of fulfilling that promise, and we have not been good architects. That when we look at the history of the American theater, when we look at the kinds of stories that continue to be produced all around the country, and especially in New York City on Broadway and off Broadway, it has been very white, it's been very homogenous, and it hasn't actually reflected the beautiful kaleidoscope of our world and of our cities. And so I am excited to do that work in partnership to fulfill that promise. And I think that was probably the kind of, the animating idea behind wanting to start the Soul Project, which is like, we're in New York City. This city is incredibly diverse. And so when I arrived at the Public Theater in 2013, that was one of the first things that I noticed. I was like, gosh, our stages and the stories that these theater companies are telling do not reflect the world. And where are my Latinx sisters and brothers? I feel like our stories have been so sidelined. So that was the impetus to start the Soul Project, to radically shift the way in which Latinx storytellers are lifted up, to give them visible platforms to share their gifts, to share their stories, and to have our community in conversation with the rest of the world.
Given what's happened in Puerto Rico, are you envisioning some storytelling around the peaceful, what I call the peaceful
The
revolution?
peaceful absolutely. I actually, just before coming here, I was actually on a phone call talking to a Puerto Rican artist, a playwright, and commissioning that writer to develop a work for Long Wharf in response to the liberation that I think is happening right now.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
on the
beautiful.
island.
Going back to something that you just raised with us, and that is the two separate worlds of theater. In New Haven, there are also two separate worlds. We
Yes.
have the well-resourced theaters that we know, Long Wharf, Yale Rep, and the Schubert,
Yes.
and they cater to mostly wealthy white patrons.
Right.
And then there's the community theater places like Bregamos, and the collective consciousness that have way smaller budgets, are steeped in community, and are really the places where people of color feel most welcome and where they see their stories told.
Right.
And so we, in essence, in New Haven, have segregated audiences based on race and based on economic status. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about the ways that we can change this.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think that we have to do a much better job of interrogating our systems and the culture that we have created inside our companies. You know, we have not been good about developing meaningful and authentic pathways to all of our communities. And I also think that what's been really pervasive in the American theater is we operate from a place of scarcity rather than one of abundance. And so, if we were to adopt a more abundant mentality, why are we actually not working together? Why are we not dismantling systems that are getting in the way of reaching all who call New Haven home and doing that work in partnership? So, you know, going back to what I said earlier, which is that the theater is a space to hold all our stories. I think about the future Long Wharf as being kind of a big tent that can really hold all of us. And so that everyone who looks in the direction of Sergeant Drive, who looks in the direction of Long Wharf Theater, can point to the theater and say, that's my theater, and that's where I see my stories. And I feel like that's going to take all of us, and it's also going to take a real commitment that the work of building an audience and building a theater company that really is a theater company with, for, and by its community, that work doesn't happen overnight, that's going to be a sustained commitment that we have to make over a number of years. But I'm really excited to roll up my sleeves and to do that work, because that work is hard, but I think it also can be life affirming and life changing work. Yeah.
At a personal level, how do you navigate these worlds?
Oh man, it's been tough, to be honest. I think you have to be a shapeshifter in a lot of ways, you know, a lot of code switching, to be honest. And
And for those who don't know what, so code switching is something that we are familiar with
Yes.
with communities of color. But explain to those who are listening what code switching means.
So and so the way that I understand code switching, or the way that I navigate code switching, is just based on the community that you're a part of, based on the room that you walk into. How do you show up? How do you present yourself? How do you speak? How do you talk about yourself? So the way that I'm say with my family is going to be very different than when I walk into a room at a faculty meeting at Yale, where I'm an adjunct faculty member. So and the reason why you code switch is because the way in which people make assumptions and judge you and interact with you based on how you show up. So that's why you shift. And I think as people of color, we have to do that work. Unfortunately, actually, that, you know, in an ideal world, you can be yourself in whatever circle you're a part of, but because of systems of oppression and systems of race and racism, it's difficult to do that. Yeah.
And for you, it's about code switching. It's about navigating these worlds. How do you personally handle the challenges with being sometimes the only person in the room. How do you challenge the challenge? How do you handle the challenges of your rising leadership,
Yeah.
and what it means as a man of color to hold your space and to try to be your full self even when you code switch?
So this is actually something that I've been thinking a lot about because, Longworth is not, we are not immune to the systems of oppression. We recognize that we have a lot of work to do, that we are a predominantly white institution when we think about the kind of work we've done, when we think about our staffing, when we think about our board, when we think about the people we have been serving. But what I think has been so um, fortifying is that we're naming it now. We're talking about it, and I think even that, even being able to talk about it, allows me to take care of myself in a new way. And where Longworth I think has actually been really great, and where I really do praise the staff and the board, is they've made space for me to talk about my discomfort. They've made space for me to honor when I feel marginalized. They've made space for me to hold them accountable. And I really think it's about meeting people where they are. As you know, Kika, that the work of dismantling these systems and the work of creating a more just world will take all of us. That our liberation is actually tied to each other, and so it's not just the people of color who can form, unions and do the work of activism together. We need our white allies. We need our white co-conspirators who are also deeply committed to this work. And so I think that has actually been really gratifying, the way in which Longworth Theater, I think I feel very seen and feel very supported. And so I feel like that's certainly a way that I'm taking care of myself.
It reminds me of the Gwendolyn Brooks quote, "We are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude." And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
let's talk a little bit about the Long Wharf and its history. It's known as a space where new plays have been seeded and created, and some have gone on to be really successful. What will your legacy be? So, hypothetically, let's say you are, decades from now, talking to your grandchildren or to kids that you've decided to mentor, and you're talking about your legacy at the Long Wharf Theater. What would you want to be able to say?
Well, yeah, I think first and foremost, I think I want to activate a lifelong conversation. I want Longworth Theater to activate a lifelong conversation with all who call New Haven their home. I want the company to be a theater company with, for, and by the people. And that idea is very much shaped by my time at the Public Theater. Joseph Papp, the visionary leader who started the New York Shakespeare Festival and later the Public Theater, that was what it was all about. It was about being a theater company for the people. And that idea, I think, is so stirring because that's when I think we can live fully in our creative democracy. And I want Longworth Theater, in terms of, when I look back, a place where art and activism lived side by side. I think that the days of just telling stories for story's sake, I think those days are over. I think that we have a bigger proposition. We have a bigger promise to deliver to the world, which is one of justice, which is one of equity, which is one of celebration. I think that the theater is social justice, especially when you can shift hearts and minds. Because when you do that, when you move people from their head to their heart to their gut, you can change the world. And that's what I hope the legacy is after I'm done with my tenure at Longworth.
Which will be 30 years.
Well, I signed a 4-year contract, so if the board, depending on what the board decides, but I do hope to be here for some time, because I think that I feel very invested in this community, and I feel like we are making the path together, and I want to do that work, that joyful, difficult, and life-affirming work in this community.
I asked you what it felt like to be back, and I'm curious to know what your impressions are, and I'd love to check in with you a year from now about New Haven.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's no secret that I think there continues to be some divisions between the work of the university and the work of the community, and I think that really trying to build more meaningful pathways where there can be a real synergistic and mutually beneficial partnership. I have been the beneficiary of Yale. You know, I'm very grateful for my time at the School of Drama. I'm grateful for my fellow faculty members. And I'm deeply grateful to this community as I get to know the different neighborhoods, the different cultural leaders that call New Haven home. I mean, it's just such a rich city. And so, there's been some change just in terms of like the development, and the different things that have popped up. I mean, it continues to be a really thriving cultural scene. But I don't know. I think it's like only time will tell. But my hope is that there can be more of a partnership and a real commitment on the part of all of us working together, with Yale included, to dismantle the systems that have created, I think, a segregated city. And whatever I can do as a cultural leader, and whatever Longworth Theater can do to create pathways and to build meaningful bridges. I mean, I think this is our work. This is our work that we must do together. And while it's hard work, I think it can be joyful work too.
I want to touch on a pretty sensitive topic, and these are some conversations that I think are quietly said, or not so quietly, in predominantly white spaces about theater and the idea of welcoming other stories
Yes.
and welcoming audiences of color. And that is that there is an assumption that when you are more inclusive,
Yes.
and when you bring in and encourage playwrights that are non-white playwrights, and when you encourage and welcome audiences that are audiences of color, that means a deterioration of the quality of the work, and a deterioration of the appreciation for arts, particularly the theater. I'm wondering what your thoughts are around those sets of really toxic stereotypes, and to what extent you have encountered them, not just in New Haven, but in theater around the country.
Yes. I think that's such an important question, and I do think that you are speaking truth to power. I think that has been a reality that I think a lot of us as people of color navigating these predominantly white institutions have faced. But I feel like I can plant my feet firmly and say that's false. The idea that the work of people of color is not of a quality or an excellence, and also just even how you define artistic excellence, that in itself is a kind of fallacy, that in itself is because who's defining what that excellence is? And what we know is that it's primarily been white leaders defining what excellence means and in what context. So I think this is a moment where we get to refashion and reimagine how we understand the work of our theaters. And in order for us to be excellent, the way that I define excellence is that, again, it's the theater can be a space to hold all of us. And I actually would then take it a step further, that you will become more excellent and the work will be more artistically satisfying the when you bring a kaleidoscope of voices together. The other thing that I would say, just some of the shows that I worked on at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and at the Public Theater, some of the most exciting work that we created was created by people of color. When the idea was that we wanted to be a more inclusive theater organization, that led to innovation. That led to things like Hamilton. That led to Lynn Nottage's Sweat. That led to Culture Clash's American Night. That it led to these seminal productions, these seminal pieces of theater, and it was because of an inclusive spirit of people of color having a voice, having a platform to share their artistry and to share their gifts.
So talk to us as an artist. What distinguishes you as an artist? What makes your heart beat? What makes your soul happy? What are the things that you wake up thinking about in terms of your own artistic vision of theater?
So much of what I understand theater to be and what it can do is largely shaped by my time growing up in California. So, I grew up, as you mentioned in my bio, Gilroy, which is the garlic capital of the world. I'm allergic to garlic, which is so random. But one of the real saving graces of growing up in that community was that it was close to a company, El Teatro Campesino, the farm worker theater. It was founded by this real visionary, Luis Valdez, who was an activist himself. In 1965, he joined Cesar Chavez in Delano, California, during the grape strike, and during the formation of the United Farm Worker with Dolores Huerta, and it was really that was where I understood the way in which art and activism could live side by side, because that was the idea behind the creation of El Teatro Campesino. And so I guess when I think about my vision, or when I think about my purpose, I think it's about that. I think it's about creating systems of equity and justice. And one of the things that I think a lot about is it's actually a quote here that I wrote down that I wanted to share. And the writer, her name is Adrienne Marie Brown. She's written a book called Emergent Strategy, and the book has really changed my life. It's a book that I recommend to everyone, where she talks about this idea. She talks about how we can use art and activism to shift hearts and minds. And what she says is, theater is not neutral. It is either advancing or regressing justice, which I just think is such a powerful, powerful idea that, we can't be neutral anymore. And so when I wake up in the morning and when I think about the possibilities of what art can do and the stories that we're telling on our stages, I'm thinking about what Adrienne is saying, that theater is not neutral. It is either advancing or regressing justice.
And the name of the author is
Adrienne Marie Brown.
So you came in January. There's a lineup for the Long Wharf for this season, but it's actually what, I'm not a theater expert, but I think the terminologies, this is not your season. Your first season starts in 2021.
Yes.
So share with us what you have lined up.
What I have lined up.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still in the process. Of putting together my first season. Yes, which will be next fall. It'll begin in September of 2020. And so I'm really using this time to read lots of scripts, meet lots of artists. Long Wharf has this beautiful constellation of artists that we've supported over a number of years. So trying to, be in conversation with them too. I mean, I really want to actually hear from the community. What are the stories that need to be told? I mean, I think that the stage must reflect and must be in dialogue with its own community. So what feels right today might not actually feel right next fall. So it's a little bit of a kind of a moving. I think I have to be opportunistic and kind of responsive to the needs of our community here in New Haven. But what I can tell you is that we will open the season with a big musical. A musical that I hope will really bring the entire community together across all lines. We will end the season with another musical by this Puerto Rican artist. I'm not able to sort of say too much more, but it's certainly an ambitious project, and I think it's also going to be a real celebration specifically of the Puerto Rican community. And then, Long Wharf has always been a home for new work, for exciting new projects. So I think that the remaining the other shows in the season will be a real nod to that also.
There's always this constant rumor about the Long Wharf and its space, and since I moved to New Haven in 2001, it's every so often you hear the Long Wharf Theater is moving. The Long Wharf Theater is moving. What is the status of the space?
It's like to be determined. I mean, I think that okay. we know that our lease is up in a few years. My hope is for us to have a permanent home, somewhere where we can really invest in a space that we can call our own, that has rehearsal space, that has an education center, that has a cafe, that has performance spaces. My dream is for Long Wharf Theater to have a campus plan that can hold all of us, and creating a kind of public square, or a public piazza, so that it's not just about coming and seeing theater. It's really a place to exchange ideas and to be in conversation with each other, right? This idea of lifelong learning and lifelong conversations with all who call New Haven home. That's my hope.
Switching from something visionary and optimistic to the reality of the world that we find ourselves in today. And I don't think it's any secret to anybody either living here or around the rest of the world that we're living in really dark times, and that our democracy feels like it's constantly under attack. And the lives of Muslims and immigrants and people of color are incredibly precarious. Um, where, how does that impact theater? And how do you incorporate this, or how does this feature into your thinking about the role of theater and social justice?
Yes, I mean, I think that this is the issue. I think this must be key to our mission and vision. I think
Mm.
moving forward, this can't be the thing that is the thing that we silo or the thing that we do to feel good about ourselves. It's a moral imperative that our stages address these challenges. I think that, as I said, I think theater is social justice. Theater is activism, but we have to be the architects of making sure that that is in fact the case. I before I became a theater producer, I was a social worker, so I did HIV/AIDS work in Raleigh, North Carolina, and that work of really um, helping to create a better world. I bring that lens
Mhm.
and that obligation to my community, to the work of making theater.
So let me play devil's advocate, because I had a conversation with somebody whose name shall remain anonymous, who was complaining about some play
Yeah.
about immigrants, and they were disturbed. And I don't know this play at all, but the narrative was that this was a play about immigration. This person went to see this play, because she's an immigrant. She was really dismayed that in the play, the daughter was a lesbian who hated the father, and that there were all of these political issues portrayed in this play. And she was saying, I just went to the theater because I wanted to take my mind off
Mm.
my life. And there are those who say, we don't need a lesson in political correctness, or we don't go to the theater to learn about social justice issues. We go to the, the theater like we go to the movies for entertainment. What is your answer to that? And I'm sure you've heard this before in all sorts of iterations.
Yes, I mean, I think that I think it's not an and or, it's an and.
Okay.
I think that it's actually making space for. I think it's certainly making space for joy, but it's also making space for liberation and for justice. That those two things don't actually have to live um, in opposition to each other. That they can actually be in conversation with each other. When I think about the future of Long War Theater, I've been talking to the staff and the board about kind of three core pillars, which is artistic innovation, radical inclusion, and meaningful connection.
Mm.
And I think that when we allow those to really be our pillars, we can do the thing that I just said, which is it can be a place for entertainment for those people who want to escape, but that we absolutely have to make room to make the world better. And the other thing that I'm thinking a lot about is our values. Like, what do we stand for? That in order to actually be a theater company with, for, and by the city of New Haven, where art and activism live side by side, what are the values that are going to help us get there? So in my mind, there are three. It's joy, rigor, and curiosity. My hope is that as we think about the future Long Wharf, my hope is that we bring people along on a journey, and that those who have been coming to Long Wharf for many, many years, that they will continue to come, that they will continue to celebrate our work and be in joyful presence with us, and that they will also help us build pathways to those who aren't coming. And so that we can be a full community together, because what I say is that your heart and mind are going to be expanded when you see theater with people who look and sound different than you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
This is a very cheesy question, and I will anticipate an eye roll or two from you. But do
Yeah.
you have a favorite play or a favorite playwright?
Oh, no, it's not a cheesy question at all. It's a difficult question just because there are so many artists that I love. But, to give you just a flavor, my dear friend who I went to graduate school with, Terrell Alvin McCraney, is, I think, a wonderful artist. He's probably most well known for his play inspired the play, or the movie Moonlight by
Hmm.
Barry
Yeah.
Jenkins. He wrote a play called Hedef Passes that I was able to be a part of at Steppenwolf, and again at the Public Theater. And he also wrote a trilogy called The Brother Sister Plays. But I just think his imagination is so expansive. There's a lyrical quality to his prose, and I just think he's so dynamic and such a special spirit. He actually has a play that just closed at Steppenwolf that he wrote and was a part of with his longtime collaborator Tina Landau. Susan Laurie Parks, she's amazing. One of the early blessings of my time at the Public Theater in New York was I was the line producer of her new play called Father Comes Home from the Wars, parts 1, 2, and 3, and that was such an exciting piece. Luis Alfaro, a Chicano writer based in Los Angeles, currently has a show running right now at the Public called Mojada, and it's based on the Greek tragedy of Medea, set in contemporary New York City in Corona, Queens, really looking at the immigration crisis. But that's what Luis does. He sort of takes these Greek texts and adapts them and puts them in a contemporary context. One of the shows that I also had worked on was called Oedipus El Rey, which was an adaptation of the Oedipus Rex Greek tragedy that we also did at the Public Theater. But the way in which Luis tells the story of the Chicano-Mexican community, I think, is so moving. And talk about someone who understands the use of theater and social justice. I mean, that's why he tells these stories, and really trying to amplify the voices of those who are not often heard.
So I feel like I could talk to you forever, but unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our time.
Oh my goodness, it went by so fast.
Yes, it definitely did. And so one of the practices I have with my guests is that I ask, it's time to get personal. So
Okay.
I'm going to ask you a few questions. The first is, who is your shiro or hero, if you have any?
My grandmother.
And why is that?
I think because of the sacrifices that she made for me to have the life that I have today.
Is she still alive?
She is.
Oh, beautiful. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. I think probably to travel anywhere that if I had an idea of a place that I wanted to go to and I could snap my fingers and go there and be there, I think that would be a pretty amazing superpower.
Like Star Trek?
Also, I have another one. Being able to maybe snap my fingers and be able to speak whatever language I need to speak. That would be a huge one. Yeah.
And then finally, because New Haven is a pizza town, are you a Sally's, Pepe's, or Modern Pizza person?
Well, because Modern is in my neighborhood, I think I gotta say Modern. Their pizza is pretty delicious, so I think Modern all the way.
I'm with you there.
Yeah.
So, folks, this brings us to the end of our show. I want to thank you for listening, Jacob. Thank you for being on the show, and I hope to have you back again after you've been through your first season. Until next time, here is wishing you many days of sunshine and more justice in the world.
Thank you.